Alright, welcome back everyone. Welcome back to Press for Truth TV. I'm Dan Dix. Today is Monday, January the 7th, 2013. My holiday break is officially over, and I'm very glad to be back here in the swing of things at Press for Truth. In fact, we've already released just yesterday our first video report of the year. That one is called In the Wake of Sandy Hook. And if you haven't seen that yet, I'll put a link in the description. It's also featured right now on the homepage of our flagship website, pressfortruth.ca. It's also right here on the homepage at pressfortruth.tv. And in that report, we document the history of mass shootings going back as far as the mid-1700s right on up to present day. And we show how recent events have sparked an intense debate on the laws surrounding gun control and just the balance between public safety and constitutional rights. And I'm glad we took a few days over the holidays to work on this one because it's of the utmost importance. One thing is for certain, what we are now beginning to see come out of all this is a complete demonization of patriots, those who are involved in the truth movement, the liberty movement, just lovers of freedom in general. I was absolutely disgusted by the mainstream media's coverage of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, in particular the portrayal of Adam Lanza's mother. I saw some clips there where she was portrayed as a crazy woman, a doomsday prepper, somebody who was worried about an economic collapse coming right around the corner, and she was taking precautions and preparing for the worst, like as if this is a bad thing, and just demonizing her about that. Meanwhile, this woman is a victim. I mean, she was shot in the face. And so the coverage is just being absolutely disgusting, but there's no doubt the mainstream media has been spinning the situation to fit their own political agenda. And that's something that I wanted to talk about today, is something that I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of this year. In fact, we're starting to see it a great deal here in Canada. Article just came out last week from the National Post that I'll share with you. And this one is called Left-Wing Extremists Anti-Government Freemen Among Canada's Top Domestic Terror Threats, report reveals. Canadian domestic extremists are capable of orchestrating serious acts of political violence, according to a newly released federal intelligence report that blames such groups for 9 bombings since 2004. The incidents cataloged in the secret report include attacks on Alberta's oil pipelines and 3 bombings by a Quebec group called the IRI that espouses a broad leftist agenda. While Islamist extremists have consistently ranked as the country's top terrorist threat since the September 11, 2001 attacks, the report shows that most of Canada's recent politically motivated attacks were the work of domestic extremists. Now, this is a very important paragraph of this article to focus on, because what's going on here is we're seeing a shift from the idea that it's no longer Al-Qaeda or the Taliban that you have to be afraid of here. It's domestic terrorism. This could be anyone. It could be your friend. Could be a neighbor. Could be a coworker. Basically, the underlining message is be afraid, be very afraid, and allow us to protect you. The Intelligence Assessment 2012 Domestic Threat Environment in Canada, Left-Wing, Right-Wing Extremism was written by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service in March. A declassified version was released under the Access to Information Act. It describes the activities of Canadian fringe groups that use or advocate violence, ranging from eco-extremists and pro-insurrection anarchists to revolutionary communists and the anti-government Freemen on the Land. The report said that 2010 had been an unusually high level of left-wing extremist activity, which is attributed to the G20 summit in Toronto and the Winter Olympics in British Columbia. Attacks that year include the firebombing of a Royal Bank branch in Ottawa and the IRI bombing of a Canadian Forces recruiting center in Quebec. And we cover this extensively in our film Into the Fire. So again, if you have not yet seen Into the Fire, you want to see what truly happened at the G20 and how these situations were used to manipulate people. Check out our film Into the Fire. I'll put a link in the description. And the article goes on here to say that the study also examined the threat posed by the Freemen on the Land, who claim they can opt out of Canadian laws by destroying their government-issued identification. An Alberta judge has called the concept pseudo-legal nonsense and a scam promoted by a profiteering conman. Nonetheless, the report said published estimates put the number of free men in Canada at 30,000, a concern because in addition to asserting that they are not bound by the law, some also claim the right to defend themselves with deadly force. Now that is an extremely serious accusation that I want to address today, and a lot of that is coming from an interview that took place just over about a year ago now, where Robert Menard, who is probably one of Canada's most recognized figureheads of the Freeman movement, was invited by the CBC's The National to take part in their program called A Canadian Concern. And they invited Rob into their studio to interview him about the Freeman movement in an attempt to portray the movement as potentially being violent cop killers. And I want to share with you now one little clip from that program, which was completely taken out of context, in which they tried to portray Robert as potentially being someone who may shoot a police officer.
A letter Menard once sent to a police officer who pulled him over. "He will pay dearly," he wrote. Just a figure of speech, he says, but what about this?
One thing, but you could be lawfully shot and killed. Is that not threatening a cop?
If just because a cop is wearing a uniform doesn't mean they are incapable of breaking the law or engaging in actions which are clearly threatening to our very way of life. What I am doing here is giving them warning that this is what could happen if they don't actively learn the law better and start operating within their mandates.
Now, that clip was completely taken out of context, and they twisted the words of Robert Menard. And the way that I know that is because I was actually there to document the entire interview just for this specific purpose, is because I had a feeling that this was going to be a hit piece aimed at demonizing the movement as being potentially violent extremists. And so I went down to the CBC studio there just to document the entire interview and to assure that if they twisted Robert's words and turned this into a hit piece to demonize the movement, we would be able to prove it. And so I'll put links to those videos in the description. I'll put a link to the original CBC broadcast so you can check it out for yourself, and then the raw, unedited footage from my camera angle so you can see how the mainstream media twists these things to fit their own political agenda. I also interviewed Rob right after the CBC interview to get his thoughts on the whole situation. So I'll put links to all of this in the description so you can check it out. And it's incredibly important to be aware that this is going on, especially because the globalists are ramping up their efforts to demonize patriots all over the world as being potentially violent extremists. So anyways, guys, it's just something I wanted to bring to your attention today. Again, I'll have all the links in the description so you can check it out. And thanks for tuning in once again. I'll see you all right back here tomorrow. Take care.